to, just have it and just listen. But more often than not, we always love you to interact and love you to take part, but you just need to do that for GDPR's sake, because this will be then shared with other members going forward. But anyway, hi, welcome to Agile Expertise. It's been an absolute while since we've been here, and I do apologize about that. That's completely my fault. But we do have some amazing speakers lined up for the rest of the year, so please do keep coming and keep joining us, because we absolutely love you guys. So I don't want you guys to miss out at all on anything. I'm really proud to be presenting Cliff Berg this time, the founder of Agile 2. So I've got him down. So Agile 2 is predominantly the book called Agile 2, the next iteration of Agile. He's the founder of the Agile 2 Academy. And thank goodness he checked his LinkedIn today, because I think you were running on US time at the time. So fortunately, we've got you, and we're really grateful that you're here. I see on your LinkedIn, you're a Grand Prix enthusiast. Is that right?
Yeah, really, my wife started it. She's really into it. And what I like is the view from the car. I don't care who wins. I just like the scene from the car, when they're going 180 miles an hour. But yeah, we watch every race. We do. Yeah.
Amazing. I love cars. I love racing, but I've never really sat in a Grand Prix car. I'd love to do that. That'd be the dream. Also, Cliff started his career as I think it was a nuclear engineer. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. I started, I studied nuclear physics and then nuclear engineering, and then I got a job as a nuclear engineer back in like 1979. And then that was the year 3 Mile Island happened in the US, which was a nuclear disaster. Wow. And the industry shifted, and I actually became anti-nuclear. I started reflecting on that. And then I realized, private industry really isn't up to the task of handling this stuff. So I quit my job and I went back to school and studied operations research. And then, anyway.
And then you kind of lined yourself up with the start of my career, which was software engineering, right?
I got into compiler development. And I also became an electrical engineer for a while, because part of nuclear engineering includes electrical engineering. So it's like a portion of it, So I was an electrical engineer, but working on CAD, on design tools. And I was on a team that developed a language called VHDL, which is like the lingua franca today for documenting the designs of chips and hardware systems. And because I was in the right place at the right time, I wrote the first, what's called a synthesis compiler for VHDL, where you could actually describe an algorithm, like a mathematical algorithm, and it would generate a circuit design that would compute that algorithm. So anyway, yeah, that was an interesting period.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And also, speaking of writing, Cliff does write a lot. So I've just shared a link in the Amazon in the chat window for Amazon, and all the links to his book. So please do check them out. Also, I want to introduce officially Nisha Joshi as well. Nisha's going to be our co-host for Agile Expertise. Nisha, introduce yourself.
Hi guys. Thank you so much for joining. It's lovely to meet you on these events and speak to like-minded people and learn lots as well. I'm an Agile coach, Scrum Master, delivery manager, coming to this with a lot of curiosity so that I can deliver my projects and deliver value to my clients. That's me.
Thanks, Nisha. Right, okay, so without further ado, Cliff, I'm going to hand it over to you. The floor's yours. Sure. And everyone just sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Thank you, Sheetal. Thank you, Nisha. And I just want to say real briefly one thing. Before you introduced us, we had been talking about Scrum, and we were kind of making fun of the fact that when you talk about Scrum in a negative way on the internet, people jump on it. But I just want to say that Scrum is fine. If you like Scrum and it works for you, keep doing that. The issue is we should be open-minded and not antagonistic. If it doesn't work for someone, we should be asking, what are you doing? What doesn't work and why? And not have preconceptions Like, oh, you must be doing it wrong, or oh, you don't understand that we should be open in our attitude about it, because different things work for different people. So anyway, I just want to share that perspective. I hate being anti something. I'm definitely not anti Scrum. Let me share my screen, please. Okay. Okay, can everybody see this? You should see, you know, how an Agile 2 assessment informs strategy. Okay.
I love the picture,
Okay.
by the way.
What?
I love the picture. Makes
Oh,
me
the
happy.
picture. Yeah, well, I grabbed it from the website.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is me, and you already introduced me, and this is a little bit of my background, but I'm going to skip that because you did that. Okay, so, you know, the big picture of this is agility has become a competitive necessity. I think we all know that. The pandemic kind of really shoved that in our face. You know, the companies that flourished during the pandemic were the ones that were able to pivot on their business model, you know, and shift in their product a little bit because consumer behavior changed. Suppliers often had problems, so you could shift that, you know, so the ability to respond really quickly. So agility is really important, you know, but, you know, the dilemma is that, you know, a lot of executives kind of feel Agile doesn't work, you know, and so we have to listen to that. We have to listen to that. Because, you know, what are we communicating it wrong? Are we, are there things missing? Are there problems with the core ideas? We have to be open to that. You know, things aren't always perfect, need improvement, you know. And another thing is that leader behavior, and actually everyone's behavior and organizational culture, are inextricably linked to agility. You know, it's not just about process. And also culture is a key component in attracting and recruiting people. So that none of that should be news to any of us. But a key thing is that we need to realize and kind of face is this is something that needs to be fixed in the industry. Agility does not arise from process. Really, agility, think about it, agility does not arise from process. And yet, all these Agile frameworks, they're processes. And I know that, you know, people who follow Scrum and SAFe and so on, they'll say, well, it's not really a process. Well, yes, it is. You know, it is a process, and you do have a lot of leeway, and you are encouraged to adjust and everything. But those present baseline processes, you know, even if they're pick and choose, they're still processes. So, you know, that's not the right place to start. Agility results from culture, knowledge, and behavior. You know, if you think about, you know, behavior is how you behave when things change unexpectedly. What do? You know, do you wait for process, or do you take action right away? Makes a big difference, especially if you consider that today, you know, issues are always coming up, you know, that are unexpected. That's like the norm. The unexpected is now the norm. And knowledge is important too. Otherwise, you don't know kind of the right patterns of ways you could respond. And culture is important because without the right culture, the desired behaviors wouldn't be tolerated. This gentleman, his name is Dan Rasky, and he has a fantastic, interesting background. He not only is an international expert in spacecraft heat shields, but he also founded a key program at NASA called the Space Portal Office that is a liaison between NASA and space startups. And if it weren't for him, SpaceX wouldn't exist today, because it was his office that was instrumental in enabling SpaceX to get a key contract just when they needed it, when they were at the point where they were about to go out of business, and it was their lifeline. And today they don't need any lifeline, but at that time they did. And this is a video. I had a conversation with him a little while back. I think this has to play through my speaker, so I'm going to crank the volume up.
And with all that going on, we had one standing meeting a week. One, okay, not 15, okay, at NASA. If we were working the same project, oh my God, we'd have a dozen standing meetings, you know, and with maybe tens or hundreds of people in each of those meetings, and most people have to do with statusing, right? So most of the time you're sitting and listening, right? Because someone else is talking. And then you find that there's very little time for you to work on your own because you're going from one status meeting to another status meeting to another status meeting.
Yeah.
And so here at SpaceX, we have one standing meeting a week, 11 a.m. on a Wednesday. Okay, so it's in the middle of the week, so you can kind of status in the middle. And it was at 11 a.m. so that when 12 noon came along, everyone wanted to adjourn so we could go have lunch. Okay, and that was it. And that was enough.
Yeah, that was interesting. He was actually in his car that day when I talked to him a few times, and he was in his car. He pulled over and changed his background. And with
all that going on,
here we go. You have to click 3 times to get the next slide to come up. So an important thing there is, we in the Agile 2 book, we talk a lot about SpaceX because it's like one of our case studies. And the reason we picked that was, number one, it's not a software company. So the lessons are general, but they build very complex, cutting edge things that like no one's been able to do, and very quickly. So they figure out how to make it, and they make it work very quickly. They're incredibly agile. They pivot on a dime. And yet they're a large company. And how do they do that? And they have multiple products. So, it's not a single product company at all. So and plus there's a lot of information about it, and they build stuff out in the open, So anyway, that's why we picked them as a case study. And a key thing about the way that they operate is they use minimal process. They don't have no process, but the process they use depends on what they're building and where in the life cycle it is. So they don't start with a process. They start working on something, and then they ask themselves, what process do we need at this time for that? And then as time goes on, they change their process depending on what they feel they need at that time. So they don't start with process. Process is an endpoint. It's a decision. It's something they're always changing. It's not they don't have a framework. Okay. So some background on, and by the way, there's a lot more information about that in the Agile 2 book, and there's some talks about SpaceX and some articles. I'm happy to share them. Just send me a note. But a really interesting company. And by the way, when I say SpaceX, I don't say Elon Musk. I know Elon Musk is controversial. Some people love him, some people hate him. This is not about Elon Musk. There are certain leadership patterns that you see in SpaceX that he has instilled through his behavior and through he's hired, and those are incredibly powerful. But this is not about worshiping an individual. This is about, not everything he does is good. I think people criticized him, he's a bad father or whatever, I don't know. But there's certain leadership patterns that are very effective, and that's what the focus on is in terms of SpaceX. So why Agile 2? Well, we launched it during the pandemic, which is kind of interesting because it was a highly collaborative activity in order to pull together 15 people with diverse skills globally in order to come up with that. And we did it very quickly, even though we never met in person. And the reason we did it was because there was clear evidence over a long period of time that there was a lot of discontent about Agile. The core ideas just like make sense, like small teams and build incrementally and, trust people, empower them. That all makes so much sense. But things aren't working. Organizations are not having success with it. So that's a problem. We need to fix that. And so we started as a retrospective and asking why. And so we put together a team of 15 people we had a table of the skills we wanted: product design, system engineering, human resources, leadership, business, of course, Agile and DevOps. Well, but anyway, we had a whole chart, and then we recruited people based on 2 criteria. Number 1, have you demonstrated through your writing or speaking that you think independently? And that was very important. We didn't want standard narrative. We wanted people who think for themselves. And number 2, you're not heavily invested in the status quo. So like you're not, you know, if Jeff Sutherland had called and said, I want to be part of that, I would have said, no, you're too invested in the status quo. There's no way you're going to change what you're saying. So we put together a team of people, and we did a retro. What is working and what's not working with Agile? And we had a long list, and we ended up with 100 or so things. And if 2 people said the same thing, we considered that to be an issue. And we identified either as a problem or an insight. And then we started having discussions about root causes. And finally, we came to consensus about a set of ideas. And unfortunately, we call them principles, but really they should just be called ideas, because they're not intended to be rules. They're intended to be reminders, you know, things to think about. Because none of these should ever be viewed as rules, because every rule always has an exception. It's always a judgment call, you know. So that's how we created Agile 2. You know, that was our methodology, if you will, for creating Agile 2. And then Agile 2 Academy, we created separately, a few of us, and we wrote a book, which, by the way, was written and published in 3 months for a major publisher, Wiley. They had never done that before. We got the book out, writing and production, with 7 authors in 3 months. 400 pages. But anyway, that was quite an experience. And then a few of us formed Agile 2 Academy with the goal of helping organizations to use these ideas. And one of the tools that we developed is an Agile 2 assessment. And we developed that with the help of a company called Human Synergistics. The founders wrote this book. It's a fantastic book, Creating Constructive Cultures. And they've been around a long time. They've worked with more than, they've done culture assessments for more than 30,000 organizations. And we partnered with them because they really like the Agile 2 ideas. And because, you know, Agile is kind of nebulous, but Agile 2 is kind of precise. You know, it actually identifies agility promoting behaviors. And so it's possible to link the Agile 2 behaviors to cultural traits using their culture model. And so that's what we did with them. And the Agile 2 assessment is an assessment of organizations' behaviors. And I'm going to show an example of that in a minute. But I also want to mention something else, which is something we've done recently, and we call it constructive agility. And you know, this is not something we're selling. This is how we work, and this is what we think people should do in terms of an Agile journey, because we all know in the Agile community that, you know, it's about the mindset and the culture, but we have to be more specific than that and more actionable, you know. So, you know, instead of a process template, like everybody should start doing these steps or in these roles, instead, it's a pathway of learning in which you define your own processes. And so you're learning Agile promoting behaviors and deciding what you should do. There are questions, and deciding what you should do. And as part of that, you're defining key strategies, and you're always evolving your strategies, and you're always reflecting and adjusting, and it's entirely event-based. So you're not creating lots of standing meetings. You know, you're always reflecting on everything. And so it's really, the whole point is to get understanding in here. It's all about developing an understanding of agility in people's minds. by making them create their own processes and informing them about things they should be thinking about and patterns, and also teaching them about like leadership patterns. There's a huge amount of research about leadership, path goal theory, leader member exchange theory, transformational leadership, huge amount of research on this. And we need to leverage that. Yes, servant leadership is an important model, but it's just one model, and it's actually a narrow slice of what's needed. It's not the whole picture. And you need different things in different situations. So we need to be informed about that. And people need to develop their own processes so that they have an insight about when to adjust their process, because process should always be adjusting. Otherwise, it's not the right process, because what you're building is changing over time. So the constructive agility is about that. Now, when we work with people, with companies, what we do is we first talk to them and what are you dealing with? What are your challenges and so on? What are your goals? And very often we'll then use some of the tools. We have a bunch of tools that we use. We use the human synergistics culture assessment tools, but then we also developed this Agile 2 assessment tool with their help. And we also developed a DevOps assessment tool, which is based on the Nicole Forsgren's DORA model, if you're familiar with that, but we feel we improved it. Because the DORA model, frankly, is kind of opinionated in some ways. But anyway, so those are gross assessment tools. And think of it like taking your temperature. It doesn't tell you what's wrong. It tells you like an indication that something might be wrong somewhere. And it gives you pointers. It's like a smoking gun, but it doesn't really tell you what's wrong, the root cause, And so this particular talk, the focus on in cases where we use the Agile 2 assessment. This is a kind of a case study of someone that we did. So in order to do the Agile 2 assessment, we work with them and we help them decide how to slice the organization up, and to sample people from the organization. And so we define some cohorts, and then we enroll them in the system, because we developed a tool for this based on a learning management platform. And then we give them access to it. And then the questions, which doesn't physically look like this because it's online, but like these are 3 of the questions. Leaders, and these are Likert style questions. Leaders in our organization are open to new ideas. Nah, or sometimes, or half the time, or usually, or yeah, definitely always. So like Likert style questions. We have outcome-oriented plans for achieving our goals. Same thing. My team has the capacity to address unforeseen issues. So you might notice some of these questions are team focused, some are departmental focused, some are organization focused. And there are a whole bunch of questions. It takes about 40 minutes or so to get through this. And then we collect the data. And this particular case study, it's about a $5 billion company. They happen to be located in our region. They're very fast growing, but it's a very tech competitive field. And they have very good engineering practices, and in my assessment, but they've had poor experience with Agile coaches. And there's, I think, a reason for that. And we're actually working with them to help address that, because we believe the Agile coach role is a very important role. But we feel there are problems with the way the role is defined. And have a well-defined learning track for every role except the Agile coach role, and major technical initiatives underway. And they're basically trying to break their tool up into a more cloud-centric tool. So based on the results, one thing that stood out for us was that the results were very similar for the senior leadership and for the people 2 levels down, which told us it's an indicator, it's not proof. It's an indicator that there's good communication between levels. It's an indicator. And so, you know, there were 4 key findings from the data. I mean, I'll actually show you the data in this, but there were kind of 4 roll-up findings. One was that participants don't have sufficient access to data for testing and business intelligence. That was one result. Another was the Agile coach role as practiced within the company is not effective. That was another outcome. And again, this doesn't tell you why. It just tells you it's a symptom. Another outcome was teams don't feel they have the capacity to address unforeseen issues. Ever heard of that? Like that their backlog's full, so there's no room to pivot, you know, no room to backtrack. And the 4th one was participants don't feel the teams are adequately recognized and rewarded for performance improvement. That's an interesting one because the company has actually done a lot of work on that, and it doesn't seem to budge. So we actually have an organizational psychologist we work with, and we're probably going to bring her in to look at that because that's kind of a puzzling one. But the one that they decided to focus on for the time being, and we're in the middle of an engagement with them on this, is the Agile coach role as practiced within a company is not very effective. And one thing we discovered was there's no consensus on what the role should be or how to assess if it's even effective or not. They actually don't know. And so the actual data looks kind of like this. And, you know, it's sliced and diced in a lot of different ways by, you know, everyone, department level, team level, organization level, and, you know, combined data. And you can see here that, you know, a higher score is better in all cases. The orange is a standard deviation. And, you know, one that seemed really low is data. There's definitely a problem area there, but that's not the area they want to focus on. And you can also drill into specific questions because then you start to see, they're very specific things that are like smoking guns. And then that gives you things to ask when you go and actually talk to individuals and start to try and explore like what's really going on. And so how do you interpret this? Well, this is a kind of a basic view of our model of constructive agility. And, you know, you can see it involves culture, behavior, and knowledge. And knowledge, like what kind of knowledge? Well, knowledge of patterns that are effective. So people use what they know. So if you're trained in PMI techniques, which are great techniques for many things, if you're building a bridge, you better know PMI techniques for planning and scheduling. But for building software, it tends not to be not good, actually terrible. You know, so what works much better for software and digital things is more lean techniques and flow-oriented techniques. You know, so knowledge of those patterns is really important because people use what they know. But an important thing about this stuff is that we can actually trace the impact. You know, so this is actually a more detailed view of our model. And we can actually trace, you know, based on the symptoms, we can trace the actual effect downstream, because this goes from left to right in terms of impact. We can trace how it will affect decision-making, how it will affect experimentation, how it will affect opportunity discovery, how it will affect quality. We can actually trace the impact flow of these behaviors and trace them back even to culture if we do a profile of the culture. So we can build a picture of cause and effect from this. You know, and of course, you know, these indicators are just indicators of things to explore. And they start to give an indication of this cause and effect. But then when you drill on and learn what's really happening, you can sharpen this a lot. And so, you know, right now, we're actually helping them to redefine the Agile coach role. And we're going to be working with them to create a learning program about that. So I don't want to get into like what should the coach role be. That's off topic, even though it's a really interesting topic, because I think the coach role is a crucial role. But I think in the industry, we haven't defined it right. And I think the term coach is part of the problem, because a coach is a leader. A leader is a person with influence. That's what leadership is, influence. And a coach has influence. They're a leader. And so what do you need to be an effective leader to help lead in the reason you're brought in? You're usually, here I am going into it, but I can't help myself. You're brought in to help teams be more effective. And so, what does it take to do that? That's what we should be asking. We shouldn't be looking to how coach is defined in the industry. Oh, it says here, a coach does this and this. Don't do that. Instead, because forget your title, you're brought in to help the teams perform better. What do you need to do that? How do you do that? That's the right thing to ask. Forget what role is called. So some challenge questions that we usually ask, true or false in your organization. We have a clear model for how to lead groups of Agile teams. Okay, say you have 100 teams. Are they coordinating well? Maybe they're coordinating about some things, but not others. Are they coordinating about what they're going to work on? Are they coordinating about dependencies and how they're going to manage the dependencies? Are they coordinating about design? Are they coordinating about how they're going to manage risk and how they're going to make sure the whole thing is tested constantly? Are they coordinating that? Are they making shared decisions about that? Because those are all leadership issues, and it can be, indigenous, or it can be imposed, or a combination, but the leadership has to be happening, regardless of whether it emerged or it's brought in, or it has to be happening. And, we have up-to-date metrics that reveal our actual agility and how we pay attention to those. So, outcome-oriented trailing metrics, what is our actual agility? Most of our Agile, true or false, most of our Agile coaches also know DevOps. Now, this is a high bar. Don't get scared if you don't know DevOps. It's okay. You don't have to be a DevOps engineer. But everyone in the value stream, including the business people and the coaches and the engineers and everyone, needs to know the basics of every part of that value stream. The people working on tech teams need to understand the product and how it's being used and the business model. They do. They don't have to know it inside out, but they need to know the basics. They need to be able to explain it to someone. And same is true if you're a leader, if you're a business stakeholder, you should know how the product is built, because that matters today. Today it matters. How you make things is important as what you're making today. Leaders of successful companies like SpaceX and Amazon and so on, they don't differentiate. In 2002, Jeff Bezos told the engineering teams, you're going to put APIs in front of everything. The CEO, because he realized that was an important strategic issue. The result of that is Amazon Web Services. It was a pretty good decision. So you can't differentiate, oh, it's a business issue or a tech issue. It doesn't matter in a field where you do business in a technology platform. SpaceX has a technology platform, their rockets, the factory that makes the rockets. That's a tech platform. Amazon has a tech platform. That's their business happens on the tech platform. Netflix tech, cars, companies that make cars have a tech platform. It's their design system that the engineers use and the factories and everything. So you can't differentiate between what's tech and business. It doesn't matter. So everybody needs a basic understanding. You don't have to be able to do the work yourself, but you need to be able to explain the basics, because otherwise you cannot have holistic conversations about trade-offs. That's the only way you can have, and because otherwise it's just negotiation. Okay, you want that, fine, but you have to give me some of this, but I don't really understand why you want that. Then it becomes based on power rather than based on the right answer. To have holistic conversations about trade-offs, to find the right answer, you have to understand what other people are talking about enough to have the conversation. And the last one is, if we chose, we have the ability to release new features daily. I mean, that pretty much only pertains to software, but it doesn't mean that you would release daily, but if you wanted to, you could, as an important, kind of indicator. And so this is about, this is a little bit of a sales pitch. I apologize, to arrange for an Agile 2 assessment, on our website, it's pretty easy to contact us. And, that's pretty much the pitch. It went faster than I thought it would. A week ago, I gave a talk and it was 45 minutes and I had 76 slides. And so I set a very fast cadence, and I think I'm still going at that speed. So anyway, I would love any comments or questions.
Thank you, Cliff. That was really, really good. And also it's got me thinking as well. So oddly enough, I'm also working with somebody to build out some assessments. And actually what you've got here really reasons with what we're also building. Sorry to say, but so, we are doing something.
That's good. That's a good thing.
It's culture, right? It's all about culture. It's all about reasoning with environments and where we are and, what's happening in our own kind of world, basically. And so I really like the approach. And actually, you've given me so much more confidence in saying, okay, you know what, this is a good thing, because we've got a very similar approach in what we're creating statements and asking people if they reason with it. And that seems to be the same thing here. And so far, we've run it about 3 or 4 times now, and it's powerful. The results on the other side is super powerful to begin like setting the strategy, just like you were saying. It gives you that direction. It helps you hone in on the really important factors, and it's not always the process, like you said. So no, thank you. Thank you. It's really reassuring. Anyone else got some questions? I know, Rex, you had your hand up at one point.
Yeah, I mean, I just like the way you said about the ideas, getting them to think about ideas rather than a prescriptive here you go, here's a framework, here's a solution, apply it to your business. And I just wanted to know how you approach those thorny conversations, because not many leaders want to know their company isn't doing so well. They don't want to hear that. They could be doing better, but they don't know how, and they don't want to be facing the truth, if you like, or facing up to some facts.
Well, if someone doesn't want to have a conversation, it's, game over, because it takes conversations. It's all about conversations. Book, read recently, Having Effective Conversations. It's really all about conversations. And, if someone in a senior leadership role wants to have a conversation, and so there's something that's bothering them or that they're wondering about to make them want to have a conversation. What is that? That's of course the place to start. There's a model that really helped me that I learned years ago from behavioral science. It's called the trans-theoretical model. It sounds like really recondite, but it's very simple. Trans-theoretical model. And it explains the stages that humans tend to go through in the course of change. And the very first step is realizing that you need to change. So, behaviorists use this to change really embedded behavior, like people with eating disorders or, psychopathy and so on. But, so that's a harder problem than like changing behavior of someone in an organization. But, someone first has to realize that they need to change. People don't always, in an organization, they think, well, yeah, this Agile stuff, but really we just need to do what I say and do it better. Like if you ask someone who's trained in waterfall methods or PMI methods, how do we improve quality? They'll say more design reviews and more detailed planning. But if you ask someone who's trained in lean and flow methods, they'll say, well, we need to identify risks better and spend time in that and not waste it on other things. We need to loop more frequently. We need, they'll come up with more rapid turnaround ideas. So their mental toolbox is different. And one size doesn't fit all. You have to apply the right pattern for the right situation. Because like I said, if you're building a bridge, design reviews is very important. You don't get a second chance, but, you know.
So Cliff, can I just well, agree and then gently challenge something you said there? But it's a conversational approach. So I agree in terms of what you're saying about conversations, but to Rax's initial point, I don't necessarily think it's game over if the individual, so the leader, big influence, doesn't want to engage. And what I mean by that is, Rax, the approach is you kind of got to meet people where they're at. So because quite often there could be a number. This is proper complexity because you're talking about people essentially, and there are just so many things going on. So one of the approaches, let's say use it in consulting, is just match, pace, lead, and that's about influencing. So the whole thing that you're saying, Cliff, around leadership is around influencing. Okay, you cannot make or force people to do that. So there's so many different things you need to do and consistently do in the general direction, and it's not perfect. So just in response to that, I think that how do you get to understand where someone is really at? And where they're at is rarely, as human beings, exactly where they say, whether they mean it or don't mean it. It doesn't mean, like you said, Cliff, that you can necessarily always help, or it could end up being game over. But actually, that's the bit you need to lean into and understand. And quite often, there's a real opportunity to start to gain that trust, to understand, unpick what the fears are, what the challenges are. You might not be able to solve all of them, but if you can engage on those levels, you can start to get that progress. And why do you start with leaders? And I know they're leaders at all levels of an organization, but let's say you're engaging with like the CEO or very senior leaders, because they have the most levers, but also they have the greatest impact on anything that might be describing what success looks like or achieving it in terms of the organization. And everything I'm saying is kind of data driven, so there's kind of research and evidence around these. So you're absolutely right, Cliff. I know I've said a lot, but it was agreeing to disagree with a conversation in mind. Thank you.
I agree completely. You know, when I said, it's game over if they want to have a conversation, I mean, you have to get to talk to them. That's all I'm saying, because you're right. You have to meet them where they are. They might think, oh, this Agile stuff, or yeah, we're doing Agile, but it's not working because people aren't being disciplined enough, or we're not doing enough work breakdown structure with Agile or something, something bizarre. And in order to you don't start out by saying you're wrong. That will kill the conversation. You start out by saying what is bothering you the most, and why do you think that's problematic?
Yeah.
Finding the end where, because you have to get them to agree on something so that they start to trust you and they realize that you're listening to them. I'm sorry, Sheetal, what is it?
Yeah, no, I was just agreeing and say, yes, to ask those probing questions and just listen. That's one of the key things here, because sometimes it's just about sitting there and listening, and then, coming down to their level, just like, Abifeni was saying, you just really have to listen and invite them for coffee. Maybe that will help. Michael, you have a question.
Yeah, thank you, Cliff. I found it really interesting. One of the challenges I've got just now is the changing culture within a larger organization. This is brought by people coming in with their own culture and interpreting the company's culture in a different way, whether they're in middle management or senior management, and they bring their own culture as well as the culture they have, and you see that changing. So in terms of being able to establish what an organizational culture is, in a very large culture organization, very difficult. And that's a challenge I'm finding in terms of my thought processes, in terms of, coming up with solutions and ideas and concepts that cover that bit, that actually culture is constantly changing, and an organization that large will be constantly changing as well. Have you had any thoughts around that, or any conversations around that? I'd be really interested in hearing.
Yeah, culture is dynamic, and culture affects behavior, but behavior also affects culture. There's a gray line. I mean, culture, actually, the definition of what's organizational culture is somewhat ambiguous. Some people say it's just the kind of expectations and values, but other people say, well, it's really about behaviors too, so it's all kind of one set of things. And, and also different parts of the organization have different cultures. Like the HR department probably has a different culture than the engineering department, or than the marketing department, or the sales department. I mean, how salespeople are. you know how engineers are. They're not the same generally. Yeah, it's fluid. You have to focus on what matters. That's why I like the human synergistics tool, actually, because we looked at a whole range of culture models. And the human synergistics model, what I like about it is it's very fine grained. It actually has like 12 dimensions. And it helps you get a profile of an organization so that you can identify, like, is our culture very internally competitive? Is it kind of antagonistic? Do people like shoot things down? Do people toe the line? Are they supportive? What are the general expectations? So, so let me go back to my case study of SpaceX. It's kind of an interesting culture. It's a little bit unique, it's a multi-dimensional culture like any place. So there are good things and bad things about the culture. But one thing that is really good is that there's a very strong cultural expectation that when you encounter a problem, you will solve the problem. Not yourself, but you will get it solved. You will reach out to people. You will raise the issue. You won't let it sit. You won't say, oh, I'm busy. I'll just keep my head down, do my job. That's how you get fired at SpaceX, for behaving like that. And I've only actually identified 2 ways to get fired at SpaceX. One is by like keeping your head down and not saying anything about a problem. Another way is by making a promise you can't keep. If they have a huge value on honesty, if you're not sure, you need to say so. You need to say, I'm not sure this will work. And that's okay. That's seen as normal. I'm not sure. Well, what do you think the odds are? I don't know, 60%. Okay, that's good enough to try. But if you say, I'm sure it will work and it doesn't, you're gone. So yeah, that's a kind of a weird thing there, but that is true there. The thing about their culture is if you encounter an issue, you're expected to say, hey, there's a problem here. Who do I talk to? Oh, it's that other group. Okay, who needs to be involved in? And you're expected to kind of lead the charge and get the discussions going that go across groups and get that problem solved. There's a cultural expectation that that's how you will behave. And that's cross-cutting, and that's not fluid. That's a consistent thing. Other parts of the culture might change. Especially they've grown, they have more process generally than they used to. But there are consistent things that characterize kind of how they operate.
Thanks for that. But just so in terms of that bit then, would you be saying that it's very important to have very clear defined statements around culture, not complicated, but simple ones that everyone can understand? Does that help that piece?
Absolutely. Culture really needs to be intentional as part of organization design, and needs to evolve and not be a fixed thing, but it needs to be part of strategy. Mm-hmm. What kind of culture do we want to have, and why? What behaviors will that culture support? Why do we need those behaviors? Yeah, definitely.
That's great. Thanks for that. Thanks for the talk.
Thank you, Cliff. That was really valuable. We've got Tom. Tom up next. Your question?
Yeah, Cliff, I'm a metrics guy, so I was really happy you mentioned you have and collect metrics, but I didn't see any in the talk. So can you give me a sample of some metrics that would compare your methods with any other Agile methods? And can you give us a link to any place where you've published the metrics? Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yeah, well, the metrics that some things are inherently subjective, but you can often turn, as you know, I'm sure you can turn subjective things into objective things if you collect them and aggregate them, but a good example is like a survey, like customer happiness survey. Well, if you ask 50 customers, and then you have some data, you have numbers, but the metrics that we collect are number of responses, so like in those graphs, each of those is a number. I didn't show the number, but what really matters there are which ones are below the line and how far. In that case, the actual value of the metric doesn't matter that much, but kind of like its relative value. And those metrics are attitude metrics or behavior metrics, not about outcomes. Outcome-oriented metrics are really important too. Like if you go to the DevOps domain, for example, or if you're talking about like, I mentioned the DORA metrics, and DevOps assessment. There's a lot of numerical things there. And, an important one is like cycle time. How long does it take to be able to produce new versions of something? And that's important because it kind of daylights bottlenecks. It's a lean metric. But then you also have to measure quality, and because you can very quickly produce junk. So if you measure both quality and cycle time, you're kind of bracketing it, and that will daylight bottlenecks, but also make sure you're producing the right quality. So those are numerical metrics that are really important. And they're, that one's outcome oriented and the other's a leading metric. Quality is outcome oriented, but cycle time is a leading metric. It's behavioral. It's how fast are we doing things, but customer doesn't care. The customer cares if the product doesn't work, bad quality or something, but you need both. You need trailing and leading metrics, because the leading metrics reflect your mental model about how your behavior will affect outcomes. And you could be wrong. You might think, well, if we improve our testing, our quality will be better. You might improve your testing, quality is still not better. You might reduce your cycle time and quality doesn't change and customer doesn't care, So, it's the leading indicator, reflects your belief about how you will impact the end result. But it's important, it's your working hypothesis. That's really important too. So you need both leading and trailing metrics. Does that address some of the things that
partly, in a sense, you got this title, Agile 2. And I wondered if you could compare that using metrics to any other known form of Agile.
That's kind of theoretically impossible because, it's Agile 2 is similar to the Agile Manifesto. It's a set of values and ideas. So, you can't say, oh, someone's using those ideas and someone isn't, because it's a mix, there are studies of like someone who religiously follows Scrum, how they do. There are studies of that, but that kind of doesn't make sense either because, I know from talking to Scrum people, there are a million ways to do Scrum. So, you're comparing apples and oranges. But you can compare specific types of things, like impact for a certain type of product, maybe impact of cycle time on quality or something like that. But, Agile 2 is not a methodology. It's like if you were to read a book on leadership, that's not a methodology either. It's someone's wisdom, it's someone's ideas. And you can try to practice that, but then the way you would do it would probably be different from someone else. And that's okay, because like Obafemi said, we're talking about people. This is complicated, messy stuff. These are not repeatable processes.
Yeah,
hope
I
that
call that
makes
the
sense.
mushy
Yeah.
stuff, right? That's what I call it. And in fact, I've actually got one of my talks where I actually point out the mushy stuff as well, which is quite fun. Thank you, Cliff. That was really, really interesting. We've got one more question, Nisha.
Hi guys. So yeah, Cliff, I heard you talking on the Agile Uprising podcast. Actually, I was listening to you a couple of days ago, and you mentioned something about, and I believe you mentioned it earlier in this talk as well, the business and leadership needing to understand how your product works and how it hangs together. So I just wanted to share, and I have a question too for you, but I want to share, today was the first time, guys, I had a senior level exec ask about how our architectural components for a data warehouse solution we're developing hang together. And that was just so refreshing to hear. I want to know how it works, she said. I want to know what the components are. I want to know how they interact. So I wanted to share that, because that's refreshing that someone at that level doesn't just think that this is something that IT does. And it's something that needs to be given attention just under the covers. So that's my one real positive observation for the day. My other observation is that you also talk about an adaptive mindset, Cliff. Leadership need an adaptive mindset. And that also means in our world as Agile coaches that it's not just a technical function that has the Scrum teams, that, you know, the development teams, if you're not doing Agile, if you're not doing Scrum, if you're practicing another method, it also needs to, the teams also need to be cross-functional, and they need to include, you know, people from other parts of the business, other disciplines, UX, for example, product design, customer experience, right? When you perform your assessment and you include, well, that's my question, do you include those other functions into your assessment? And what did they say? What kind of outcomes have you seen and observations have you seen from those assessments?
Yeah, we include everyone who, I mean, we decide this with the leadership sponsoring the assessment, but, ideally we want to include everyone who impacts the value stream of, whatever set of products we're talking about. And, that probably not even enough, because, if an organization has 100 products, those products are not independent, especially not nowadays. Products are much more interdependent than they used to be, which really challenges the whole feature team idea. But which is a great ideal, but realizing that is really challenging. Products are complicated today. So I think your question is about what do non-product focused people who participate in the value stream, what do they think about Agile?
What do they think about Agile? What are their observations? How do they feel on that level of inclusivity within the process, and the part that they play? How is it easy? Do the teams make it difficult? Where do they see the challenges? What bubbles up to the surface in your assessments?
That's a chronic thing. So, my own experience with that predates this. That's a chronic problem at almost every organization. There have been many instances where I helped people to set up, to bring these other parts in earlier. There was one case where we did, actually a really useful tool was a value stream analysis, which it's important to realize, the whole point of that is not the value stream or the analysis. The analysis is not the point. It's a tool to bring people together to create a shared mental view of where the problems are. After that, you can throw the value stream map away. We don't need it anymore. You created the shared understanding. You don't need to do it completely. You shouldn't. You should focus on where are the problems and focus on that. But a key issue usually is that people are not included. One particular case comes to mind where the security people felt they were called in at the end. And so this was not a very agile organization, and the release team was called in at the end, like, here, release this. Well, what is that? So but then there's, the challenge is, how do you include these groups? Because, this kind of breaks Scrum. Because now you have all these different experts and they're like silos. So how do you include them? And Agile unintentionally, the Agile movement unintentionally disenfranchised product design, data science, business intelligence, and what's the other biggie? Product design. I've enumerated these.
Probably governance as well.
And, because it used to be 20 years ago that most big organizations had data architects, for example, and product design teams. A lot of them had product design teams. And these are people who, they're cohesive teams that work together and design products. And they know how to bring in users and be generative with users and ideate and come up with product concepts. That programmers aren't trained to do that, and we basically cut all those people out, and because they didn't go fast enough, and so today, so organizations had data architects, and they would maintain enterprise data models and information models that were very important. And today, Andrew Ng is a machine learning, world-renowned machine learning expert. He taught the seminal course at Stanford that became really popular, which I took, by the way. It was an excellent course. And his belief is that organizations need to be horizontal in terms of their data, that they need to be organized around data. So that's his perspective. But today, what we have is, very commonly, we have Agile teams pumping data into a data lake, JSON objects, if you will, and that are completely undefined. The team, they create microservices, and then the team sends a JSON object that they publish. Oh, it goes into the data lake. And a friend of mine who's a machine learning expert was working at Walmart, and he quit because he said, this is garbage. I can't do anything. I can't make heads or tails of this, so, the Agile movement did that unintentionally. There was no ill intent, obviously, but that was an unintended consequence, because instead of, what we did is we basically chopped out the data architects and either moved them to the side, out of the way, or got rid of them, instead of figuring out how to maintain data models in an agile manner, which is what we need to do. Because data architecture is an expertise, it's a deep expertise, and we need people embedded with teams part-time or something. I don't want to architect it, but we need that expertise set up so that it's not a bottleneck, so that it's a supportive function, but a function that you can't bypass. But it has to be real time. It has because it used to be data architecture was like, tell me what your data requirements are. I'll craft it. It'll take me a month, and then I'll give it to you, and then we'll do the physical model. And then 2 months after that, I put the final touches on it, and then you can start building it. That doesn't work today.
No.
But what we can do is we can have a data architect available who you have to keep in the loop, and they're maintaining the model as you're going, like plane as it's flying. And they don't try to get it perfect. They say, oh, you're not sure what that field is or what it means. Okay, don't worry about it. We'll fix it later. And that's okay. And they come back to it. And so they don't slow anything down, but they're maintaining the domain model and the bounded context or whatever kinds of models you're creating. And then the machine learning people have stuff that's documented that they can match up. Aha, this thing is the same as this thing. And they also, even better, they have someone to go to and talk to about it. there are data architects who they can go and talk to and say, is this really the same as that? What does this really mean? And the data architects will know, because that's their focus. So, and the same thing happened with product design, and now we try to fix it by throwing UX people in, like throwing pepper on eggs. For some products, that's fine. But for other products that are in a very competitive consumer space, or that need to be very functional, like the cockpit of a fighter plane, you need people who study the ergonomics, or who study what consumers are doing, and you need real product design teams, but they need to not be a bottleneck. They need to be working in real time collaboratively with the development teams. And how you solve that depends. And that's an opportunity for creativity. There isn't a pattern that everybody should use. It always depends.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. So my key takeaways, because you've just unpacked a lot there, Cliff, for us. From your answer, my key takeaways would be develop a proper understanding of the business problem, and with all of the cross-functional subject matter experts that you have, an early identification and a deciding together of how you want to work to tackle that problem, right?
Yes.
Yes. So no, thank you so much for that.
Yeah, it's a design problem. Actually, this is an Elon Muskism, although he's not the one who invented it, but, designing the machine that makes the machine. When you set up teams, you should have a vision for how everyone's going to work, but they should help co-create that vision. And think you should be creating that kind of core, intelligent group that is always listening and always asking for input, that is constantly evolving that machine that makes the machine. How do we include our data architects? Is that really working? What do you think? What are suggestions? Someone raised on here, we should work better that way. Oh, okay, let's consider that. It can't be everybody deciding everything, because that doesn't scale. And then you lose leadership, but good leadership is always listening and always asking. Paying attention.
That sounds like a talk in itself, doesn't it? So it's a whole brand new topic, and actually you've just triggered me on that one. So I've actually written it down, and I've already titled it called "What About the Others?" So I think there's an opportunity here. So if anyone's interested in co-creating,
that was a movie. What About the Others?
Yeah.
It was a movie. I think it was a horror movie, actually.
Even better. I'll make it creepy, and I'll do it on Halloween. I'll wear my witch's hat. Cliff, thank you so much. I do have one more question, if that's okay, and hopefully we're all okay for time. Just a short, snappy one. In part of your assessment, one of the actual outcomes was that there's inefficient agile coaches, and there's no clear role and what they're meant to be doing. What does your gut tell you is the problem? So if you were to say, what is your gut instinct there that the problem is?
Oh, I could go on about that. I feel it's a critical role, and we haven't defined it right. I think the core problem is the term coach.
Yeah.
Because there are different kinds of coach, and so we're looking. There are paradigms within the coaching field that are very hands-off and kind of like almost like behavioral therapy, and there's a place for that. And I think that's an important ingredient of leadership and coaching, but it's not the whole thing. I think we need to not think about the term. We should be thinking about what are organizations looking for when they bring in an agile coach. What kind of help are they seeking? And that's, I think, where we should look for the answer to that. I think the role of coach, we need to think of it as a type of leadership role. And like the sports coach is a type of leader. a team manager for a sports team brings in a sports coach to improve the performance of the team. I mean, the sports coach doesn't go on the field and play games, but they will tell the team, be here at 6 a.m. for practice. They're prescriptive about that. And they bear some response, some accountability for performance, not for winning a given game, but for improving the team over time. They bear shared responsibility. It's not all on them. It's the team and them, and they need to be involved in setting the goals. They need to be involved in saying, well, I think given this team and what I'm seeing, I think I can improve their performance in this way. Because I've talked to them and about the kind of training we're going to doing after working with them, I think we can improve in this way. We're in it together. And so there should be a shared accountability that the team and the coach in improving their performance in the way that they think they can improve. And, and then the other thing is, accountability sounds scary, but what's really important is how the organization responds. If it responds in a positive way or a negative way. A negative way is punishing. Oh, you didn't meet your goal, you're fired. Well, if you're really floundering and you can't seem to get your act together, then yeah, you're fired. But life's messy. If you're be supportive. What do you need? So the response is really important too.
Absolutely. And also, it's not a one size fits all role either. You've literally got to sense check what's going on in the organization. So, you may go to one company and you already know exactly what needs to happen and you just roll with it. Whereas there's other ones, you might be working in silo, believe it or not, it can happen where you don't know, what's going on. And it takes a little while to really get people to come out from the rabbit holes, I suppose.
Absolutely. Every situation, I mean, there are patterns, but even patterns notwithstanding, every situation is unique.
Exactly. Cliff, it's been an absolute pleasure. Everyone, thank you so much for your continued support to Agile Expertise. It really means a world to me, and it's really good to see everyone again. Watch this space. I'm going to be tracking down a few people who I'm sure you'd absolutely love to come and hear speak. So please do watch this space, and who knows, maybe one day Nisha might do a talk. I'm just going to put that up there. Obafemi, I know and I am aware that you also want to do a talk as well. So, it's there in the pipeline. So please come forward. I'm going month by month this time. So usually I would prepare a year in advance. I'm not as organized this year, sorry. So it's month on month, but please do watch this space because we are going to make a huge comeback. So. And
Sheetal, I noticed there are 33 things in the chat. And I'll defer to you if you post anything or anyone posts something in the comments site. I'd be happy to respond.
I will run them in the comments and so that everyone gets to see them. So
good.
Great. Well, thank you
pleasure.
again.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Cliff, and good to see you all again. See you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good evening.
Have a great evening.
Bye.